Welcome to the first edition of the eponymously named Tucker Carlson Tonight Show. I got a haircut for the show. We're glad you're here. Everything in the political world has changed in the last week, but on many college campuses, things have just become more the way they were, which is to say hysterical, reactionary, and totally out of touch with the rest of America. Classes and exams have been postponed, safe spaces have been erected, protests planned, and administration buildings occupied. What is going on? And by the way, what exactly is a safe space? Joining us now is Jill Hopkins. She's an assistant professor of journalism at DePaul University, and she had a very emotional group of kids in her classroom shortly after Hillary's concession speech. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I keep reading these stories about people breaking down on college campuses, and I try to put myself in your position as a professor. So you have a kid come into your class crying about the election. As the adult, shouldn't you say, you know, it was just an election, and it was democratic, and nobody got cancer, and nobody died, and maybe you should toughen up a little? Why wouldn't you say something like that?
Well, what I tried to do in my class on Wednesday morning is I taught my first class of the day, which was an introduction to journalism course, and we had talked about the election, political polling, fact-checking prior to Election Day. And I think for many students, the result was, as for many people in the United States, a surprise. And I taught my class shortly after Hillary Clinton gave her concession speech. And for many students, particularly for young women, it was something a glass ceiling to break, to aspire to have a woman as president of the United States. And so I don't think it's about, as you were saying, being hysterical, but it's about processing and having a space to make sense of what happened and to have a discussion.
I get it, but it's also about having safe spaces. And at the University of Michigan Law School, where adults presumably attend, and I'm quoting now, post-election self-care and food and play. So this included Play-Doh and Legos, a safe space for people to go to, you know, feel, I don't know what. And that is kind of the question to you. What is a safe space exactly?
Well, in my opinion, the role of higher education is to foster debate, but also to be cognizant of students that are coming to our campuses from many different backgrounds. I work at DePaul University, which is an urban campus here in Chicago, a very diverse campus. And so, for example, in my class, the way that I approached it the day after the election was to return to themes that we had talked about prior to the election in terms of the role of a press in a free society. And
okay,
the role
but wait a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you. And I think those are great questions, and I'm glad that you're raising them. But the role of the university, in practical terms, is not to foster a debate, it's to squelch it. And so people who disagree are crushed, and people who agree with the herd are elevated. I mean, is there really a debate? Do you know a single DePaul University professor who voted for Trump and said so out loud? Do you know one?
You know what? I do not talk about my personal political leanings with my colleagues.
You know as well as I that there isn't any at all. And isn't that a problem? Isn't that a lack of diversity?
I don't think that you have any evidence to support that claim, and that's actually not the right question. The right question is the role of the university to, again, I teach journalism, and so what I said to my students the day after the election was returning to the role of a press in a free society. And our role as journalists, as you would know, is to hold all elected officials accountable, regardless of our personal
political leanings. But also our powerful people. And you're a professor, and so you fall into that category, if I can say, as someone to whom others look for guidance. And I just kind of want to press you on this diversity question. So the whole idea of diversity is that the airless room produces bad decisions. We need people from different walks of life who have different points of view in order to make wise decisions. I think that's the underlying justification for it. And yet, in academia, there's virtually no one who disagrees from the liberal orthodoxy. Isn't it, and this is a sincere question, isn't it time for some sort of affirmative effort to bring people who disagree from other walks of life into your world?
Well, we certainly try to foster discussion, debate, and have dialogue about the role of free speech on college campuses, the role of free speech in society, and certainly I think that this election does bear out that we need to find ways to reach across partisan divides and speak with those who do not share our own views.
Well, fostering a conversation about free speech is different from allowing free speech, I notice, unfortunately. But, Professor, you're game to come on, and I appreciate your point of view. Thanks a lot. So what is next here in Washington? It's a question we plan to answer daily on a variety of topics, but tonight it means who's going to fill the almost 3,700 appointments in the Trump administration. Time is running short. Reince Priebus from the RNC was just named White House Chief of Staff. John Bolton or Rudy Giuliani could become Secretary of State, reports suggest. But who's going to face the press every day in the briefing room, one of the most high-profile jobs in the West Wing? One name apparently on the short list is our old friend Laura Ingraham, who joins us now. Yes,
old.
you are.
Well,
you're not old. I'm old.
Thanks a lot, Tucker. By the way, I'm just still trying to get over the microaggression. I felt there was a sphere of microaggression on this. This is first of all, I'm so happy to be on your debut show.
I'm so glad you're here.
And they said, well, would you be on Tucker's first show? I said, are you sure he wants me?
I said, kidding?
I said, oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
I wanted to get you on before you get drafted by the Trump people. So would you take the job?
You know, I'm honored to be considered for that job and other jobs. So we'll see what happens. But I would look. You are my old friend, and I'd tell you. But I think people are getting a little far ahead of the narrative. But
is it hard for? I mean, you've been trained for as long as 20 years, as long as I've known you, to give your own opinions. Is it hard for people who have a life like yours to sort of transition to?
I'm sure there is an adjustment period. I have my company Life's That, radio, Fox. I write a bunch of books, so it's a big decision. But I'm at the point where if my country needs me, and if I could do something to actually, advance the Trump agenda, which is stuff I've written about now for 15 years with trade and immigration and just renewing America, then I obviously have to seriously consider that.
So are they on schedule, do you think, to populate this administration?
I think so. And I'm not sharing any inside information here, but it's a heavy lift. I mean, there's a lot to do. I worked, right out of college in the Reagan administration, and I was just a little peon, junior speechwriter in domestic policy. And there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of different moving parts. The agency level, the independent agencies, the cabinet, the departments. The underlings, like you pick the cabinet, everyone's like, okay, we're done. Oh, no, because the assistant secretaries and the deputy secretaries and their staffers and the chief of staff, that's
titles that exist only here in Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
So where's Christie in all this? And without asking for inside information, but he was, my understanding was, running the transition. And now you keep hearing that he's not involved at all. Like, what's that about?
I'm not sure what can happen there, but I do think that clearly Mike Pence is has a significant role. But I know Chris Christie and Donald Trump are old friends and good friends, and I would be shocked if they they weren't in daily communication.
So you can learn a lot about how someone plans to govern by the people he hires. Yeah. And so early in this race, Donald Trump laid down a marker on foreign policy against the Iraq War and foreign adventurism in general, and a lot of the neocons in Washington really took umbrage. I mean, they didn't like it at all, and they still don't like it. And so I'm reading now that John Bolton and Rudy Giuliani are under consideration for Secretary of State. I like them both. They're very smart. Yeah. But they're on the other side of that debate. So what does this tell us about where Trump plans to go?
I think Trump's agenda is going to be Trump's agenda. And if you go into the Trump administration, you're not going to be pushing someone else's agenda. You're going to be pushing his vision for American renewal on the economic front and a pragmatic foreign policy, I think, closer to Reagan than to George W. Bush, where it's peace through strength, rebuilding this economy, sending a strong message to our adversaries and our allies that we take care of business at home, we honor our commitments to our allies. But if let's face it, if Americans don't have faith that the economic system here is going to work for them, then we're going to have a lot of semantic debates about American intervention around the world. So I think Trump made that clear during the campaign that we got to get this country going again make sure our military and our men and women in uniform are properly cared for and do all that. It's a lot to do, but it's not 1985. We have $20 trillion in debt, and we have to be very honest with ourselves and with our allies and our adversaries about what's possible.
It's a massive departure from the past, whatever happens.
Well, and probably wasn't smart for all these national security experts. A lot of them are really good people, but to sign these letters and Trump's dangerous to the world. I mean,
well, not just some experts, but like the entire foreign policy establishment. So the question becomes,
they were always right. Because they made all the right decisions.
Is there a group that was wrong more consistently than the people who run
other than the press corps and calling this election?
And the CIA. No, you're absolutely right.
So there are a lot of people who have a lot to answer for.
So really quickly, the Steve Bannon question, he was elevated just below the White House chief of staff. It's caused a lot of controversy. I'm withholding judgment. I don't know enough. I do know that he appears to have a long trail of broken relationships behind him. Are you concerned that this is a divisive appointment?
No, what I'm concerned about is that people on the outside of this administration are going to try to blunt the effectiveness of the Trump team. Bannon, Kellyanne, Steve Miller, Dave Bossie, and I think Reince Priebus all together ran a really successful operation that beat the Clintons, the Obamas, and the Bushes. The media, Hollywood, academia, all of them. The entire U.S. press corps. That core group of people are stellar, and they did a stellar job.
Well, I agree. I mean,
and the smear campaign that's going on about Steve Bannon, and I've been around Washington a long time, I don't like these smear campaigns. I think they're unfair. I think people are tired of them. He's a very smart person. He has, he built a media company, just with an idea. After Breitbart really brought that to the fore. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I get it. I understand that. But I think people should take a breath, give him a chance. He's a really good person and a really smart person.
I don't know enough to render judgment. I will say Stephen Miller's one of the smartest people I've ever met.
And
so
I mean,
if
brilliant,
he's in charge,
30 years old.
We're good to go.
This is a good team.
Well, it's a good omen
want
to
say
have you on.
congratulations to you, Tucker.
I really appreciate
You're never
that.
someone who wants any praise, which is another reason why people like you. So many people have come up to me in the last few days saying, great. They're so excited
I owe them
for
money,
you.
and now it's time to kind of settle up.
They're excited for you, and anyone can get you to get a haircut. This must be a real step up for you.
That was by force, trust me. Laura, thank you.
Great to see you.
Great to see you.
All right, take care.
So what else is coming out of Trump Tower tonight? It's a big question. We asked Fox's Carl Cameron, who is live outside that building on Fifth Avenue in Midtown. Carl, what's going on?
Hey, Tucker, congratulations. Glad to be on your inaugural show, too. And you may be looking at the next White House press secretary right there in the studio with you. Unclear at this point. She's one of a number of people, Laura Ingraham, who are being considered for that position. Tomorrow, the Vice President, Mike Pence, Vice President-elect, will be coming to Trump Tower. He'll come back from Indiana, where he's been taking a couple of days off of to go back and do his day job. And as the head of the transition, he's going to be looking to announce some appointments later in the week. We learned just a short while ago that there are 2 new candidates, potentially, for the Department of Education secretary. Now, Ben Carlson, one of the former rivals who became one of the early supporters and an internal Trump loyalist, is also being considered for the education secretary. But the former chancellor of the D.C. public school system, Michelle Rhee, is now being considered for education secretary. And Eva Moskowitz, who is the CEO of the Success Academy Charter School here in New York, is also being considered for that position. Now, education cabinet secretary is certainly not the big money positions. A lot of speculation about Rudy Giuliani potentially being the Secretary of State. We're not expecting to hear any announcements probably until as soon as Thursday. Obviously now with Steve Bannon ensconced as the senior advisor, there is, with Reince Priebus, sort of a yin and yang kind of a situation with an establishment chairman of the Republican Party with Priebus and Steve Bannon, who's very much a counterintuitive conservative. And he does come with a reputation for having been a very, very bare-knuckle fighter as he was the CEO of Breitbart News. There are tons of names. Somewhere between 3,700 and 4,500 people have to be formed in this government, and they're going as fast as they possibly can, but they've got a ton of work to do, and they're trying it to be as deliberate as possible, so we probably won't hear any more names of actual selections, though we're certainly going to hear a ton of names in the next few days for people who are being considered. Tucker?
So, Carl, really quickly, I want to just back up to Michelle Rhee. I know education secretary is not the most vital position, but it is, I think, an interesting indicator of something. She ran the schools here in Washington. I think most people thought she did a good job. Has she responded at all to the suggestion that she would take over?
Not yet. We have, not to my knowledge, I should say, these are both women. There's a certain diversity that this adds in the administration. The Trump insiders are saying that these 2 potential selections show that they are going to work outside the box. It's worth noting that a lot of Republican conservatives have been saying we should do away with the Department of Education over the past couple of decades. Trump's obviously bringing in people who are very experienced in that particular field, and they're citing this as an example of how the Trump administration will be broad, will be diverse, and will have outsiders and insiders.
Well, if you're not going to get rid of it, Michelle Rhee is probably a pretty good choice. Carl, thanks a lot for doing that. I appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, time for tonight's Twitter storm. It's a roundup of the most intense weather patterns in social media. And not surprisingly, Donald Trump's election is still generating the most bluster. The outrage has been particularly intense in the pampered famous person community, and it's a big one out there on the west side of L.A. First up, singer Ariana Grande summed up the feelings of many in her gated community this way. Well, this is utterly terrifying, she tweeted. Actress Sophia Bush agreed. The tears have come. I haven't slept in 28 hours, and the tears have come. And I'm just so sorry for all of us. Truly, time to get to work. Katy Perry agreed it was time to do something, though she was not clear about exactly what. She wrote, quote, "Do not sit still. Do not weep. Move. We are not a nation that will let hate lead us." Hitting a contrary note, as she often does, Rosie O'Donnell said this, quote, "I'm not scared. I'm sad for all of us, dash for humanity." Author Stephen King, a better writer than political analyst, wrote this, "No more book recommendations, politics, or amusing dog pictures for the immediate future. I'm shutting down," he wrote ominously. Actress Rashida Jones took it one step further. She said, "I want to quit life." Wow, the drama. Imagine watching the Grammys with these people. It would be a long, weepy night. Luckily, you don't have to. Next up, how did Donald Trump turn traditional blue states like Michigan and Wisconsin to his column? We talked to some of the voters who did that. You'll see it next. Also, Trump's kids are playing a big role in his presidential transition, but they're also going to be running the Trump Organization, the whole empire. How's that going to work? Maria Bartiromo, coming up. Well, for decades, the Democratic Party represented blue-collar America, lunch bucket America. Republicans hated to admit that, but it actually was true for an awful long time. It's not true anymore. They're all Trump voters now. So what happened? We sent correspondent Matt Finn to a tool factory in the Midwest to find out. Matt?
Good evening, Tucker. Well, congratulations on the new show. It's exciting to be with you here on this first night. But here in the Midwest, Donald Trump won the majority of states in the presidential election, even capturing that crucial swing state of Ohio and turning solid blue states like Michigan and Wisconsin. And although he did not win the state we are standing in tonight, Illinois, one thing is clear. He received major support from blue-collar, white working-class voters. And we got to talk to some of those voters at this tool plant. Take a look. Klein Tools is a Chicago-based American-owned and operated manufacturer that employs over 1,000 workers. From start to finish, Klein uses American steel to create hand tools that you could find at places like Home Depot. In the Democratic stronghold of Chicago, we caught up with some employees who tell us why they voted for President-elect Donald Trump and what their hopes are for the future.
I voted for Donald Trump because I think we need change in the government, and he's, I think, very good businessman.
My concern is jobs. That's it. Job security. Make your family stable. As long as you got the job, you can support your family.
The last 8 years, we saw every day business close the doors, business leave the United States, and that thing is very important for us.
The hardworking Americans, it seems like he spoke directly to them.
My hope is for him to elevate the middle class like me.
I hope he can do what he promises he can do.
Now, Tucker, this exact location has about 75 employees, and of course, they're not all fans of Donald Trump. Back to you in New York.
Matt Finn, we really appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Heading outside into the wider world for us. Well, will Donald Trump continue to solidify the support of the middle class in the Midwest, the Southeast, and the rest of the country? Here to tell us is David Goodfriend. He's an attorney and a longtime Democratic strategist. He served in Bill Clinton's White House. David, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me on your inaugural show, Tucker.
Oh, are you kidding? I knew exactly where to go for smart analysis that is fundamentally wrong, and I knew I'd get it from you.
That's too much pressure.
So here's my analysis. I mean, the macro analysis is the Democratic Party was for years the party of the middle. It was the party of the middle class, working people. True. They always bragged about it, and they were right. It's now, and the numbers bear this out, the party of the rich and well-educated, and the party of the poor. People are wholly dependent upon government. That's an unstable coalition, but it doesn't even seem to me that they're even trying to get the middle class. They're mocking the middle class. Why?
Well, you'll be surprised to know I kind of disagree with that characterization, although I would agree with you, and I'll meet you this far, that I think the Democrats this time around did not perform well among middle-class voters compared to prior elections.
Yes.
Let's take my home state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You know, your correspondent was in Illinois. I'm from just north in Wisconsin. Wisconsin voted for Obama twice.
Yeah.
And this time around went for Trump. And I think if you look at the map and what happened there, an awful lot of Obama voters switched to Donald Trump. And I would argue they did it for the exact same reason both times. The manufacturing economy has been hammered. The GM plant in Paul Ryan's district, not far from where I went to college, has been shut down after being open for 100 years. And Wisconsin has not recovered as well as other states have. Even neighboring Minnesota has done better. I think when that kind of economic insecurity is being felt by people, they just want something different than the status quo, and they'll do anything to get it. My fear, if I can just say this, Tucker, I would give props to Donald Trump if he pulls this off and helps manufacturing come back to my home state. I would give him credit for it. My fear is that if right now you look at the people who are lining up in his administration, a Goldman Sachs banker to be in charge of Treasury, I mean, that's not exactly what those Wisconsin voters were talking about.
Okay, but let's be honest. No one at Goldman Sachs gave money to Donald Trump, virtually. Everybody at the big investment banks, everybody at the hedge funds, everybody in tech world, and this is demonstrable, you can prove it, gave money to Hillary Clinton. No lobbyists gave money to Trump. Like, honestly, all the people who've gotten rich in the last 10 years gave money to Hillary Clinton, not Trump. So that tells you something. But here, I want to go very quickly to the West Virginia numbers.
Okay.
You worked for Bill Clinton. He runs in 1996 for re-election. He gets 51% of the vote in West Virginia. Now, he's like kind of an elite liberal, but he got 51%.
Well, he's in Arkansas, a good old boy, too.
Okay, but he had already been president for 4 years, and he was raising all this money from Hollywood. His wife gets basically half that.
Right.
26 points. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that Democrats don't talk about middle-class economic issues anymore. They talk about global warming or esoteric social issues like who should use what bathroom. These are not issues that the average person making 40 grand a year cares at all about, because why would he?
Well, I would beg to differ in that both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders talk about pocketbook issues.
They do.
Enormous,
You're right. You're exactly
enormous
right.
support from the Democrats. And by the way, we have to be clear here. Bernie Sanders almost won the nomination. I mean, I was a Hillary Clinton person. He came pretty darn
close.
close.
Why not nominate someone who actually talks about issues that voters care about, not just rich Hollywood liberals care about?
I happen to think, first of all, Hillary talked about an economy that grows to middle out, but let's not talk about Hillary. She's not going to be a candidate anymore. I would venture to guess, and you're seeing this play out in the Democratic Party right now, you're going to see a struggle in the Democratic Party for going back to exactly those lunch bucket issues you talked about. And I think you're going to see that the Democrats that rise up, that actually take charge of the party, that become the nominee, are going to be meeting Donald Trump toe-to-toe on those voters. Here's what Donald Trump could do to throw them off. Start with an infrastructure package. Start with jobs in manufacturing in places like Wisconsin. If he comes through on those promises, it's going to be tough to beat him.
But if he doesn't, look, I'm not shilling for Trump, but you know exactly the truth, which is Trump wants an infrastructure, and not just the wall.
Absolutely.
And the Democrats want one. If they try and block that, then that just means they're not even interested.
They're not. I'm here to predict that he will peel off plenty of Democratic votes for that. I think he will. Here's my question. Will the folks in the conservative right in Congress block the infrastructure project that he has in mind? That's going to be a huge struggle.
The people who still care about math? There are a few of them. We're in a post-math era, but there are a few. We're out of time, unfortunately. We'll solve this in the commercial break. Dave, it's great to see you.
Great to see you, too.
Appreciate that. Well, the New York Times utterly disgraced itself, and it's not an overstatement, this election, by openly rooting for one of the two candidates. Can you guess which one it was? Well, how over the top was their cheerleading? Don't take my word for it. Even they are now admitting it was bad, sort of. We've got more on that ahead. We've got the details. Plus, Trump has been elected. His voters are thrilled. But how is the Republican leadership in Washington taking that news? We'll talk to one particularly plugged-in U.S. Senator coming up. Stay tuned. Well, they admitted it, finally. The New York Times, which is a newspaper, dipped to breathtaking new lows covering Donald Trump. The paper just apologized, in a way, to its readers. It says it wants to rededicate itself to honesty. They may have a point. Take a look at some of these headlines from the paper during the campaign. And by the way, these are real, just in case. Black voters aghast at Trump find a place of food and comfort. Trump's pledge to jail Clinton gets expert thinking of tin pot dictators. Lewd Trump tape is breaking point for many in GOP. At least that one's true. Trump gives a lie but refuses to repent, striking a moral tone. Trump suggests gun owners act against Clinton. Trump declaration seen as threat to rule of law. And rise of Trump tracks debate over fascism, not to put too fine a point on it. Joining us now is Guy Benson. He's political editor at townhall.com, and the great A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of Real Clear Politics, and someone I've shared many insights with. It's great to see both of you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Congratulations. Thank you. These are like literally beyond parody. Now, why am I so spun up about this? Why should we care? Few of our readers, I'm sure, viewers even read the New York Times, because it does set the tone for the rest of our business. And they went so far over the line that, like, we could play a game all night. Spot the ludicrous headline.
Well, I think the New York Times, in acknowledging that they did not cover the Trump voter and the debate that is now going to be front and center about how the Trump voter has fared in the last 10 to 15 years. The New York Times is obviously looks a little myopic in speaking to a more urban electorate. Right. Obviously, it's a more liberal paper. It doesn't matter if you're Donald Trump in 2016 or Romney in 2012 or McCain in 2008. These are discussions that we've had before. They endorse Hillary Clinton. You know, that's as old as the Hill.
But it's more than liberal. I don't mind liberal. I live with liberals. It's the arrogant, smug, dumb, and small-minded. That's different from liberal, don't you think?
Well, I think actually acknowledging that they failed in their coverage and really covering what was going out in the middle of the country, that's not a part of their readership, but actually would impact the election. Therefore, elect Donald Trump, destroy the Democratic Party for years to come. I think it's good that they acknowledge that they failed that in their coverage.
But they probably had to, Guy. I mean, I doubt anyone. No one wants to admit fault. Nobody, especially the New York Times. Don't you think that the misbehavior of the press, the unwillingness of them even to concede you could treat Trump unfairly, is the end of their franchise? Like, who's going to believe the New York Times, the Washington Post, which is even worse, or NBC News, or CBS? I mean, isn't this just the beginning of their collapse and a new era of alternative media, which may not be good, by the way, but that's going to happen?
I think it was a fearful response from the Times editors saying, oh my gosh, exactly. We really missed something here. And maybe in a sea of out-of-touchness, we might be uniquely out of touch with normal Americans. That was a few days ago. And then here we have today a full-page story in this very same New York Times headline, Newly Vibrant Washington Fears Trump's Effect on Its Culture. and if I may, very briefly, Mr. Obama's arrival in 2009 coincided with an urban renaissance, speaking of our capital. What the effect on Washington will be when Donald J. Trump moves into the White House is hard to predict, but many Washingtonians fear the worst. So their self-reflection lasted 2 days.
So, AB, do you fear for Washington's cafe culture in the wake of his election?
No, I really don't, and I understand why this is hilarious. But at the same time, I'm kind of two minds that, the New York Times produced some of the best reporting of this campaign about the minds and the thinking and the practices of the Trump team, who obviously spoke to them because that's how we learned about it through the reporting.
They did. You're right.
And the email server. They broke the email story.
But if you were a real reporter at the Times, if you're Mark Mazzetti or someone who's like universally acknowledged to be a good reporter, wouldn't you be just heartbroken at what your paper had done?
But they're working for the paper of record. They aspired to work there, and it's true that Michael Barbaro wrote pieces on Donald Trump for which he was lacerated by Trump on Twitter. And Trump threatened to sue the New York Times. Never has he sued them. Never has he asked for a correction. I know he'll do this for 4 years because he doesn't have Obama and Hillary to pick on. But at some point, like I said, I'm of two minds on this. They've actually done really good reporting on part of the campaign of 2016.
Well, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, the Donner Party did good things too, but like, that's not what they were remembered for. But let me just say really quickly, why should reporters at papers like that be allowed to tweet? Doesn't that kind of undermine the credibility of the whole enterprise? When they're sharing
if they're tweeting personal opinions on stuff, I think that does undermine sort of the purpose. I think the issue with the Times is the entire editorial approach and editorial bent. They lost very hard this year because they went all in for Hillary, but also down ballot. They were endorsing Senate candidates all over the country, most of whom lost.
Yeah,
surprise, surprise.
That. Guy, AB, thank you for that.
Thanks,
Great
Tucker.
to see you. Well, we are really glad to welcome now someone who is closely monitoring the effect on Washington of the new Trump administration. He is Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, and he's going to be on hand as Trump tries to drain the swamp. Senator, it's great to see you. So this is a massive...
Great to be on the show with you,
as you just saw guys explain with that Times story, this is a massive clash of cultures. Washington that has no interest in being reformed, this new president who wants to drain the swamp. I got to wonder how many Republicans in leadership are on the side of the New York Times versus how many are on the side of Trump, sincerely.
I think almost every Republican in the Congress is on the side of Donald Trump.
That's good to hear.
Especially when you pit them against the New York Times.
Right.
Look, Donald Trump clearly ran on a change agenda, and that's what the American people have delivered. And I'm excited to get to work with the president-elect. I know most of my colleagues in the Congress are as well, on delivering on the promises that we made on rebuilding our military, on replacing Obamacare with a much better health care system, on building a wall and getting immigration under control. These are issues that are popular, and they helped Donald Trump win a big landslide in the Electoral College.
They sure did. The Speaker of the House, though, and people in his orbit are very concerned about entitlement reform, and I'm not mocking that at all. I think it's a legitimate math-based concern. Trump has basically made it very clear that he's not interested in that at all, and that most voters are not interested in that either. I mean, that at some point, those two worldviews are going to collide, no?
Sure. I would say I agree with Senator McConnell on this matter. We have agreements within our party on the vast majority of issues, and on those small areas where we might have some disagreements, we can work those out in private between ourselves. On Medicare and Social Security, Donald Trump, though, has said exactly what so many Republicans have said for years. We're going to keep the promises that we've made to America's seniors.
Right.
In the long term, though, in the 8th year of a Trump administration, Medicare will be approaching red ink in terms of its finances. So in the long term, we may have to reform those programs to make sure we can deliver those promises. But immediately, the most important thing we can do to get all of our government back on stable financial footing, to reduce our deficits, and to get the debt under control is to have a healthy, growing economy, which we haven't had under the Obama administration. I believe we will have now.
So the Speaker of the House went on another network. He was talking to Jake Tapper. I happened to be watching. I took notes. He said, I want to, and I'm quoting, put people's minds at ease. There will be no deportation force. I wonder what percentage of Trump's voters kind of want a deportation force. I mean, whose minds is he talking about?
Well, Donald Trump said last night on 60 Minutes that he's going to focus on criminal aliens. And I think most Americans are shocked that our government isn't already focusing on criminal aliens. There may be 2 million, 3 million. That number is unknown. But if you're a criminal and you're not entitled to be in this country by law, then of course you shouldn't be here. You should be returned back to your country.
Right. I didn't hear the Speaker say that.
Well, Donald Trump said that.
Donald
Trump is the president, and Donald Trump's going to be in charge of immigration policy and law.
That's true. Do you think they're on the same page, by the way, on immigration?
On most issues, I do. On immigration, Donald Trump ran not just on security and enforcement, which is important, but he also ran on reducing legal immigration, and we need to do that because people who work on their feet, they work with their hands in this country, they haven't seen a pay raise in a long time. And part of that is because legal immigration has been at such high levels, and it's driven down wages and taken a lot of jobs. That's why Donald Trump ran pretty well with Hispanics compared to some past Republicans as well. So I think that Donald Trump has got the right approach to immigration. You heard that some on 60 Minutes last night, but that's one reason why he appealed to so many working voters all across the country.
Legal immigration, that's the real debate, and that will...
legal immigration. You have to address legal immigration in addition to illegal immigration.
Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, thanks a lot for
Thanks, Tucker. Glad to be on the inaugural show.
Well, Hillary Clinton has finally figured out why she isn't the president-elect tonight. Clinton told a group of supporters recently that the reason she lost the election is simple. FBI Director James Comey. She says that Comey's letter to Congress, which he dropped 11 days before the election, thrust her own email controversy back into the news, which of course it did. But did it swing the election for Trump? Here to tell us, or to debate it anyway, is Chuck Rocha. He's a former advisor to the Bernie Sanders campaign and an all-around savant on politics. So, Chuck, I wouldn't discount the possibility this has had a role, though I've talked to some of the data people around Hillary, and they don't think it was definitive. But is it really bigger than her failure to, I don't know, articulate a campaign message? Run on something? Right. I mean, really?
Well, we both know, your viewers know, I ran a campaign against her for a year. I can tell you lots of things that are out there, reasons why Hillary might not have got elected. But let's just look at this one issue, because I dug into it a little bit this evening. And if you just look at the Michigan numbers and the Pennsylvania numbers, saying that if she won Pennsylvania, if she won Wisconsin and Michigan, she would be the president in Pennsylvania. It comes down to less than one vote per precinct. So in my mind of thinking back, is it one person per precinct who would have been affected or could have been affected by it? I'm going to say that it could have been.
Right.
Just because if you look at the numbers that came in a place like Washington State,
right.
It's an all-mail state. All of the ballots are mailed in. And before the Comey letter, Democrats were winning by 4 points. Everything after that was postmarked after the Comey letter, they continued to gain to where Republicans actually picked up House seats in Washington State, a very liberal place. Right. So that's what I'm looking at. I don't have any raw data. But that's
I don't think that's crazy. I'm not saying that's crazy, actually. Right. I mean, but another way to look at it would be the more you learn about Hillary Clinton, the less impressed you are.
Right. And somebody has to say, well, guess what? Hillary Clinton and her team are not blaming themselves. They're going to blame somebody. That may be shocking.
That's it right there. I guess that's it. Is we all revert to type in the end, especially under pressure.
Right.
And their decades-long habit is to blame someone else, whether it's staff or the media, or in this case, the FBI director, instead of looking within and saying, how did I screw up, like normal people do when they lose, right?
As a Democrat who's been running campaigns for 25 years, the shocker to most people in our profession is that it was this close to begin with, where the Comey letter would have had a little bit of an effect, but that little bit of effect was probably enough to lose her the election. It was only 70 votes between Michigan and Pennsylvania, so it probably had a devastating effect, but the fact is, somebody that had 30 years of experience, who had a great resume, was that close to begin with. That's what drives Democrats absolutely nuts.
Well, so Bernie Sanders, who kind of has been an obedient little revolutionary for the past 6 months campaigning for Hillary, betraying the hopes of his followers, I would add. But he had this on The View of all places, which I thought was pretty smart. He said, I think what happened is Trump touched a nerve on the part of millions of people the media doesn't talk about. You've got a middle class that for the last 40 years has been shrinking. You've got millions of people living in poverty and economic anxiety. Meanwhile, the rich get richer, in effect, he says. That's true.
Absolutely. I grew up in rural East Texas. We've had these conversations, Tucker, about the little place I grew up with in Brownsboro, Texas. The people that go to work there every day feel those frustrations. They're not bigots, they're not racist. They are just angry because they feel like their government's not speaking to them. That's the reason I became a Democrat. It's because I worked in a factory. I thought that the rich guys got all the breaks. That's what I wanted. That was my party. Guess who had that message this year? Guess who the Democrats let steal that message, and all he talked about was making America great again.
But I don't want to blow your mind or anything, Chuck, but the Democratic Party is the party of rich people. Look at the exit polling. Rich people, people making over 400 grand, voted Democrat by a margin.
Absolutely. And that's where the
So why wouldn't they represent their interests? I mean, that makes sense, right?
So we need to reset the way that we talk about this and figure out a way to get to those people who have been hurting, who Bernie Sanders was absolutely talking about. When I was involved in that race for a year, the people that filled our halls every night were those people who were frustrated, who thought because at least Bernie Sanders was consistent. They may not agree with everything that he's ever said, but he was consistent. They believed that they trusted him, he would make it better.
You're right. John
every day.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Congratulations on the show.
Thank you very much. And here's something new. That's a segment we're going to do every night where we try to blow your mind with a fact you hadn't heard. Dana Perino thought up this segment, actually, so it's going to go great. So here's what you didn't know. Facebook is right-wing. Many liberals, believe it or not, are now blaming the social networking site for Trump winning. They're accusing it of promoting fake anti-Hillary Clinton stories. The presumption being supposedly that any anti-Hillary Clinton story must be fake, I guess. CEO of the company, Mark Zuckerberg, says that Facebook is going to proceed, quote, very carefully to eliminate hoaxes so that opinion stories mistakenly flagged as incorrect aren't axed. Okay, but remember, this is the same Facebook that is run by close friends of the Clintons, one of whom just volunteered to work for Hillary if she won. The same Facebook that was exposed earlier this year for suppressing conservative news stories. And there's this also. Former Facebook product designer Bobby Goodlatte wrote this in a Facebook post, quote, sadly, Newsfeed optimizes for engagement. Newsfeed is a feature on Facebook. As we've learned in this election, BS is highly engaging. These outlets, these conservative outlets, and Donald Trump have no concern for the truth and really only care for engagement. Okay, now not to be a conspiracy nut, but what if you had the most powerful news site in the history of the world, the portal through which, a huge percentage of your news flows, and they were hostile to your political views? Would you be worried? I don't know. Joining us now is someone with a very smart opinion on everything, Maria Bartiromo, host of Mornings with Maria and global markets editor of Fox Business. Great to see you, Maria.
Hey there, Tucker. Congratulations.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Should we be worried about Facebook? It seems like an awful lot of power in one place to me.
Well, it is a lot of power in one place with 1 billion people looking at Facebook and going on Facebook a day. There's no doubt about it. And that's why everyone was up in arms throughout the campaign to learn that Google was doing similar things by basically suppressing negative stories about Hillary Clinton and always putting in the search field things that were so positive about Hillary. Look, I don't know about this fake news on Facebook, and I don't know about Facebook being to the right, but I will say this. Who knew Michael Moore was to the right, Tucker?
Well, Michael Moore, and I've never agreed with a single thing he said, but he does have a tangible sense of what people outside Washington, New York, and Los Angeles think. So, he's got a massive leg up on everyone in our business, I will say that.
For sure. And that just portion that came out of the movie, Trumped, was so positive. And I think that it helped Trump, frankly. And I don't think he did it intentionally.
No, I think you're probably right. So I like to keep track of predictions that go wrong, just because I'm a perverse person. So I'm forever saving this Paul Krugman piece from the New York Times. This is election night, and I'm quoting. If the question is when markets will recover, a first pass, and I'm quoting, is never. They're never going to recover from the disaster of the Trump presidency. Have they recovered?
Hugely, Tucker. We are at all-time highs in the market. And if you remember on election night, I think I saw you coming out and I was going in and I went on right after you. And Brett and Megan said to me, what's going on with the market? The futures are down 800 points. And I said, this is going to turn out to be an enormous buying opportunity. And the reason is because the Trump economic plan will likely move the needle on economic growth. You're talking about lower taxes and you're talking about a rollback in regulation. These are two major things that will not only help companies, but help corporate earnings and thus help the stock market. And that's what you're seeing play out in the market right now. When the market really turned on election night was when investors started to figure out that not only does Donald Trump have a growth plan, but he's also going to be able to get that growth plan through, that it's a Republican sweep, that in fact we will see tax reform in 2017. We will see a rollback of regulations in 2017. That's great for the stock market.
That's amazing. So even though a lot of investors didn't want Trump or didn't say publicly they wanted Trump, they're happy with the result.
Well, I don't know that all investors did not want Trump. You're right about the elites and the heads of the major Wall Street firms. They were very skeptical of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, as you know, tapped into the working man and woman. He spent that time in Wisconsin and spent that time in Michigan and really understood what was the underbelly of what this was all about, jobs and the economy. And so